Okay, so everyone, today we're going to have a very quick run through the second book of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. This is a very important book in within the Nicomachean Ethics, and Aristotle talks here about what the virtues are, right? Aristotle's ethics are called virtue ethics because basically when you look at how things are evaluated, what is said to be right and wrong, good and bad. Um, Aristotle places the emphasis on character traits, stable, slowly changing, relatively generic and flexible personality traits. And basically, what this means is that often what we can evaluate is what kind of person someone is and how that shows through their actions. And Aristotle thinks that's what we can meaningfully criticize, and that's what's going to influence mainly what kind of motivations people have in different social settings. Hence, this focus on virtues. Now, virtues here don't mean just to dispel something. They don't mean what they meant in 19th century Europe and U.S. So these are not like the very old-fashioned, a little bit bigoted, or some people like to think traditional values of Victorian Christianity. So it's not like chastity and like be very humble, be a good wife, stay at home, be a gentleman, and so on. That's one particular conception of the virtues, and it was a very historical, very unique and interesting, and in many ways restrictive and psychologically damaging conception of the virtues. But Aristotle lived in ancient Greece 2,400 years ago, so they had very different ideas about what kind of character traits people should have. And there are a bunch of questions that come up when we look at character traits, right? And one of them is, uh, how many kinds of these are there? Well, Aristotle says there are the intellectual virtues and virtues of character, right? So intellectual virtues would be things like, how well we learn to do different things, reasoning, logical thinking, speaking clearly, and so on. Absorbing different kinds of information and making use of it efficiently. The virtues of character are what are going to influence our morally relevant behavior. And as you know, I'm sure you have, if you're here watching this video, you know a little bit about Aristotle and his ethics. Um, Aristotle's conception is that humans are social animals essentially. We can only be happy in a community, and a community is bound to be political if we want to help people to maximize their opportunity at happiness, leading good lives. Then we need some kind of organization. We need to run the community well, right? So the virtues are about how we are going to be able to be happy as social political beings, but also as individuals within that community. And these things are not supposed to be born with us, they're not innate, and we don't get them for free, right? So Aristotle thinks we need to learn the virtues. Um, there are some inborn abilities in most animals. Aristotle, of course, recognized this. Coordination skills and things like the way babies grasp or they start forming sounds and they try to learn to speak and communicate. They learn very quickly about cause and effect connections. They learn very quickly about temporal ordering, sequencing of things, and so on. Tracking the eye movement of other humans. But the virtues are not like this. We can learn the virtues. They're a bit like skills. We need to engage in activities and we need to practice how to be virtuous. And to develop the capacity to act virtuously, we actually need to practice this a lot. So they're a bit like, language or being a good organizer, a good artist, a good accountant. You need to be able, you need to do those things. If you want to be good at math or English, you have to try and solve maths problems, and you have to try and use English, write in English, produce English, talk in English, and so on. It's the same with virtues on Aristotle's account. Of course, Aristotle, because of the emphasis on the social political nature of people, thought that a good political system, good leaders would habituate people, train people, basically give people opportunities to learn how to be virtuous, right? So if you have a very corrupt or dangerous leader, it could be in a democracy, it could be someone who sells themselves as a good leader, but they're just an actor and they're dishonest, they're corrupt, they're doing things that actually don't live up to the ideals of the community. In a dictatorship, it could be, if the country is unlucky, a dictator who's cruel or whatever, embezzles funds, tortures people, suppresses discussions about what would be good for the public. Those people will obviously not be helping because they don't set a good example about how to become virtuous, and they don't care about helping people to lead happy lives. They have different goals, power, enriching their families, and so on. Um, so, this is all interesting because if you think about your own life, you might think, there's no one else who can tell me how to be happy. I'm an individual. I can figure it out. And I think to a large extent that's true, but Aristotle also seems to have a point in saying that um, the examples we see around us in the community we live in are going to matter a lot in what kind of habits and character traits we pick up and how that's going to set us up for the challenges we face in life. And that's going to influence our ability to be happy. If you have bad teachers or if you're lazy, then if you don't try, we're not going to be virtuous, and so much the worse for us and our community as well. Um, there are a couple of metaphysical details, right? What are the virtues? If you ever work on motivation and philosophy, you know that many people talking about these things look at motivations as mental events or mental states, usually occurrences. If you're some kind of Humean, you probably think that they're occurrences in your mind that maybe supervene on your neural functions. And character states are character traits are states according to Aristotle, and they persist throughout a longer time, and they incline us to recognize certain facts as reasons for or against actions in particular situations. Um, Aristotle says that agents must always look at what is appropriate in each case as it happens, as do doctors and navigators, right? So we need to practice how to apply the virtues, right? So one key virtue Aristotle talks about is being brave, right? The virtues are always a kind of mean. You can have too much of it or too little of it. Covered would be someone who is never brave, right? Shies away from everything. And someone who's rash would be someone who takes on too many challenges too bravely. It's not easy to figure out what's the brave thing to do, right? So you do need practice, and probably a couple of times you're going to mess up. It's not like everyone is either brave or not. You can become braver, basically. So imagine you see someone bullying one of your friends or someone in your family, or even just someone, you're at a football game and you witness some kind of interaction between people sitting next to you, and it's clear that someone is being bullied and they're miserable about it. It's not just friends jesting. In these situations, you can choose to, speak up. And be brave and defend the person who's being bullied, or you can be a coward and not speak up, or you can be rash and try to shut down the person who is bullying. There are different options, of course, and in some situations, of course, it's a rash thing to stand up. If there is a chance that you will get beaten up, it's better to call the police. You need a little bit of experience and good wisdom, judgment to get it right, how to be brave. So finding the right mean is a challenge. It's not easy. And it's a little bit, again, to give you an analogy or a similar example that's maybe more common and clear or relatable to many people, is about dieting, right? So you could think that an elite athlete is going to need a lot of high protein, high nutrition food, a lot more in calories than someone who's just an average person doing an office job and jogging a couple of times a week or going to the gym a couple of times a week. The diets of these people will differ greatly, and it's the same with virtues. You need to recognize your circumstances, you need to recognize your own abilities, and you need to develop good judgment in how and when you use them. Um, so being brave is a healthy middle ground, being covered between being covered and being too rash, right? So how does this connect to ethics and happiness, right? Like basically, often to stand up against injustices, we need to be brave, right? If we don't have the virtue of being brave, we won't be able to do anything against a bad leader, against a corrupt regime, against people trying to harm us or our family. We won't be able to compete for positions. We will shy away from new challenges. We won't try out an exciting, fun new game or sports or whatever. And some amount of bravery is needed for all these things. And every time you don't do these things, you let your community down, you let other people make your life or your community's life, including yours and your loved ones, is worse. And every time you miss out on an opportunity that you don't take because you're afraid, you miss out on a chance to improve your life, to be happier, and look back in 30 years like, wow, it's good that it was scary to start learning tennis. I was a bit older, I wasn't a beginner, or skiing, but I still did it. I pushed myself for a new language, a new skill like coding or web design or whatever you are into, going to a new club, going to a new bar, meeting new people. But you push yourself and you end up doing something that might enrich your life greatly by making new friends, learning new skills, learning a new hobby, and so on and so on and so on. Um, so this is how there is a connection with happiness. There are many other virtues in Aristotle's system. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can find tables of this, or best you should go and read the chapter and the whole book, ideally. But they all work in the same way, that there's a means that we need to get right. Now, how to find this, right? In a real life situation, this is going to be pretty hard. And this is why Aristotle emphasizes that you need a good role model. You need maybe your parents, your boss, older colleagues, good teachers, good friends, people at your sports club, people at your hobby club, who you can talk to and you can see how they act in real life cases. I mean, this is how we learn often. The virtues are part of the package that we learn. And in different terms, Aristotle says this is pretty much about reacting to the right pains and pleasures, right? So if someone cares too much about easy things and following what's pleasurable at the moment, that's the wrong kind of happiness. You'll be momentarily happy, you always choose playing a video game rather than pushing yourself a bit to learning a math skill or learning a computer skill, learning an artistic skill, reading that book for your humanities course, understanding a sociological model, or whatever else you're doing in your life, working a little bit more, socializing with people, going to a political rally. But you're choosing momentarily pleasurable things, but they don't add up to much in the long run. Very often when you reflect and you look back at these periods of your life, they will feel a bit gray or gooey, maybe nice, but in a mediocre sense. Whereas usually when you look back at times in your life and you push yourself and you really dug your heels in and you managed to overcome a challenge, you took on some amount of pain in order to succeed. You will make much nicer memories, and the whole trajectory of your life will rise in quality. Um, right now, obviously, a brave person won't find it emotionally challenging, painful to stand up for what is right, while the person is still learning it will find it. And this is the investment, right? This is when you have to overcome the pains. The same as with training. At the beginning, it's very hard. Later it becomes easy and even pleasurable to do some training, or pushing yourself to put yourself out there in different kind of social situations or take on responsibilities at your job, right? At the beginning it's very scary. You're like, wow, know the complexity, the depth. But after a couple of years of working, you realize, well, actually, I know how to do this. I can take on a new role. I can apply for a promotion. I can, tell my colleagues that I would like to do something, get involved in something, and so on. As someone who enjoys easy things too much will be at the risk of becoming addicted to such things and develop what Aristotle calls an intemperate personality, which is linked to weakness of will. Right? You won't be able to really push yourself to realize any long-term projects and achieve anything that requires a bit more commitment and focus. You can think about getting a diploma, getting an extra qualification, doing well at a more difficult job that pays more, gives you more security, more challenge, more excitement, a chance to get involved with shaping a little bit bigger things in the world. But you can also think about raising children, taking care of your aging parents. A lot of things require us to have some temperance and be able to stick with things. Um, right. There is a bit more in the chapter on particular issues in motivations, right? How we choose. So according to Aristotle, there's three motivations for choosing something and three for avoiding, right? So pro are that something is noble, something is useful, or something is pleasant. And con are that it's shameful, or it's harmful, or it's painful. We all know what's pleasurable and painful, what we enjoy, what's painful, but the virtuous person, Aristotle thinks, learns what's noble, what's useful as well. Not just useful in the sense that, oh, I can make more money, but also like, if I do go and vote, I can shape my what's going on. If I do go and write about an issue to my elected representative, it does matter because they are tracking how the public perceives them, because they do want to get funding, they do want to get re-elected, and so on and so on. It's not pleasant, but we still need to be able to choose to do these things. Now, some people learn the wrong lessons, right? They have wrong examples. They grow up in regimes. They grow up with ideologies that train them to choose shameful or harmful things. You can think about someone who is just greedy or purely egoistic. They grow up with the mindset that nothing else matters than personal success, and you can walk over other people, you can just use other people, discard other people. It doesn't matter if your company destroys other companies, if it cheats on taxes, if your boss asks you to get involved in projects with regimes or militaries that do indefensible things. Some people sadly become like that. They're insensitive to the wrongness of these things, the harmfulness of the things. You can think of engineers who are willing to work on destructive weapons that are then used against civilian populations in different places in the world. These are all horrible things, and basically they are actions of people who their community probably failed by not offering them better guidance and education when they were young. As Aristotle puts it, both skill and virtue are always concerned with what is harder, because success in what is harder is superior. And it's true, I look back on my PhD, I didn't get a lot of money out of it, but it has been amazing. It's an amazing journey if you can complete that kind of thing. Looking back at running a couple of half marathons, of course, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people can do it, but still, for me to, train, stick to it, do it not just once, but several times, chiseling my time down, pushing my time down, but it's been fantastic learning how to play football at a decent fifth league level still, and sticking with sometimes helping friends who were going through hard times and they were unpopular at the time, or it was very hard and required sacrifices from me to stick with them and help them. These are all memories you can treasure and help you later with other challenges as well. Right, so there is a contradiction, right, that we encounter if we look at all these things. And Aristotle says to become just or temperate, you have to do just or temperate things. But how could you act justly or temperately if you're still learning? Well, the thing is, it's a bit like with any other skills, you start to cook, and at the beginning, sometimes you will get it right when you have the right instructions, and sometimes you won't, right? Sometimes the dinner you make will feel really, taste really good, and sometimes it won't. It's simply because maybe you haven't seared a piece of meat before in the right way. You experiment a couple of times, after that you get it right. You don't know so well how finely you really have to chop those garlics, or and so on and so on. How much tomato sauce you need to add, how much sugar, how much salt, how many other spices, your basil, your oregano, whatever you use, parsley. Right, it's the same with this kind of actions. You might get the instructions, you might have seen the examples, but you actually need the first-hand experience, and it doesn't mean that you never will get it right. Aristotle isn't saying that people who don't have the fully developed character trait can't act justly ever or temperately. It's just that they won't be reliable. It won't be a constant thing. They won't have a success rate over a certain percentage, if you want to put it that way. And just as in many games like poker, the pros are a little bit better than non-pros, right? But those 5-10% by which they're better and win more, 60%, that matters enormously, and that's why they can do really well financially. It's the same here. It doesn't mean that you will go from 0 to 100%. It means that, from getting it right. Sometimes 30, 40, 50%, you might go to getting it right most of the time, or more times than not getting it right, 60, 70, 80%. And maybe some people are amazingly virtuous and consistent, but most of us aren't. So, how to act virtuously. What happens when you face a genuinely new situation? Because that's a challenge as well of a certain kind, right? You could be at a point where, whoa, I haven't seen anyone act, I don't have any instructions. Now, this is kind of a test. Are you really virtuous, or are you just good at following instructions? Are you still just kind of under the tutelage of someone? And this is where you have to choose consciously for the right reasons to do the virtuous action for the sake of acting virtuously. And again, this is gonna require some intellectual virtues to evaluate your situation properly, some experience, some practice, and some smarts, right? And practical wisdom. This is a very interesting thing, that you have all the individual virtues in Aristotle, like being brave, being magnanimous, being friendly, being witty, being just, being temperate, and so on. But all these things only create a normal personality if you kind of have that knack, right? You have that practical wisdom and how to bring it together into a consistent personality, and how to be reasonably flexible and apply these skills in new situations. So, how do these things work? Well, this is going into the details of the motivational theory of Aristotle a bit, but that's part of the story. Basically, Aristotle taught that our souls, these are not magical free-floating things as in some religions, but part of us as biological animals, it's one part of our minds, have feelings, consist of feelings, capacities, and states. The feelings are things like appetites, we want certain things, fears, joys, hates, pities. Right, so these are kind of like preferences. Some of them are standing preferences, some of them momentary fleeting preferences. We have capacities that make us able to experience pleasures and pains, and thereby feelings, and we have these kind of states which are specific dispositions towards preferring or wanting to avoid certain kinds of pains and pleasures. Right, so a bad disposition would be feeling too much anger, feeling too little anger, and not being righteous enough, right? Letting important injustice go. A good disposition is feeling the right amount of anger when it's justified, right? Being righteous in a correct way without being too judgmental. So you shouldn't be think about social media. A lot of people get upset about minor absolutely uninteresting things, the sexuality of other people, the private life choices of other people, the actions of celebrities, but they don't get upset or they don't get angry when a politician misbehaves in very serious ways, when they support the genocidal war, when they don't step up against the invasion of another country, when they authorize selling dangerous weapons to countries that misuse them against their own or other countries' civilians. I mean, that's what you should be getting angry about. A lot of people use anger in the wrong way, right? Um, of course, a lot of politicians and businesses exploit this kind of things. Um, which of these states are virtues and vice? Which of these three things, feelings, capacities, and states, are the virtues and the vices? Well, Aristotle says they're not the feelings. We are never praised or blamed for our feelings. They just come and go. They're less controllable things. Um, Virtues originate in rational choice, but feelings do not. Feelings move us. Um, but having a virtue or vice is more a state that we are in. So this is basically his characterization. They are not feelings, they are not capacities. Capacities are what enable us to become virtuous, to experience things, to make choices, consider reasons, weigh them up against each other, and so on. But they're not themselves the virtues. They're what enable us to be virtuous. So they are states. If you would be more interested in, like characterizing a metaphysics of the mind, then this would be quite important, for example. Or if you want to link this up with different accounts of motivation in psychology, social psychology, then you can. This is quite useful, the specifications by Aristotle. Then which states are virtues, right? So according to Aristotle, virtues are those states which make something good. And here again, he gives an analogy in the case of the eyes. The eye being able to see well is what makes the eye good. If you take a knife, it cuts well. The horse, it can carry its rider, it's good at running, and so on. So, what makes humans good? Virtues are states which make people good, and if they're good, they have a better shot at being happy. That's the story, right? So, these states that help us to achieve happiness, the long term, overall happiness in a life, that's what is a virtue. Um, if you're in this kind of state, you're able to aim at the right middle in your actions. So, there is this quote: I'm talking here about virtue of character, since it is this that is concerned with feelings and actions, and it is in these that we find excess, deficiency, and the mean. For example, fear, confidence, appetite, anger, pity, and in general, pleasure and pain can be experienced too much or too little, and in both ways not well. But to have them at the right time, about the right things, towards the right people, for the right end, and in the right way is the mean and best, and this is the business of virtue. Similarly, there is an excess, a deficiency, and a mean in actions. Virtue is concerned with feelings and actions, in which excess and deficiency misses of the mark, while the mean is praised and on target, both of which are characteristics of virtue. Virtue then is a kind of mean, at least in the sense that it is the sort of thing that is able to hit a mean, a balance, the center, right? You see the original, this is what we have been kind of unpacking. We want to avoid excesses, deficiencies. We want to kind of get the right balance in our behavior, which doesn't mean what often people in political debates. Oh, I'm a centrist, as if that would make your view more likely to be true. It doesn't mean anything. Sometimes people who have a certain very specific, not at all centrist view might be right. Sometimes on a specific question, people who are anarchists might be right. Sometimes laissez-faire capitalist might be right sometimes, a communist might be right some questions, a socialist might be right on some questions, someone who's not thinking about the economic side but more about, I don't know, like in the US they're obsessed with religion and sexuality, right, and in those things is a conservative. Sometimes maybe they are right, but sometimes maybe a more progressive, or in the US they say liberal person. It's not at all what it means, but traditional, but it's how they use it over there. You know, these things, these labels are not very helpful. It doesn't make much sense to think in their terms. And but Aristotle isn't trying to be dogmatic and saying this is always what's right. It's more like it depends on the situation, and actually, you need the ability to get it right. And we can only be right about things in one way. There's only one truth about most things in the world. It's not like, oh, the center is less likely to be wrong. No, the center can be very wrong and very false in many ways. If you're not angry about someone authorizing military strikes in international waters, you're not angry about the right kinds of things. If you're angry about the private life of other people, you're not angry about the right kind of things. If you never get angry about anything, you have a deficiency. If you get angry about everything, you have an excess, right? So this is important. Now, some things are simply bad. There's no good way. There's no means in being a good drug addict, for example, right? If you watched Breaking Bad, Aristotle isn't saying that, oh, like you might be a crack addict, but do it in the right way. There's no right way of doing certain things. Spite, envy, adultery, theft, murder. There's no right way to do these things. These things are actions which are the results usually of vicious characters, people who have very bad character traits, who really got things poorly. A drug addict might not be a bad person in terms of wittiness, friendliness, kindness, being able to caring, but they might be a very vicious person when it comes to temperance and strength of will, and it might mess up the whole picture for them, right? Some politicians might be quite good people when it comes to allocating funds to education, listening to new ideas, new sensible science-based ideas about medicine, rejecting crackpots, rejecting conspiracy theories, rejecting products pushed by the companies of their friends, rejecting spurious claims of large pharmaceutical companies which haven't been yet confirmed by extensive testing in the scientific community. But that politician might still fail if they're corrupt, right? If they steal a lot of public money. They might do well by the public in some ways, but that doesn't make them a good person overall. Some things just cannot be done in the right way. They can never be good and contribute to happiness in a way around society. A good society is not individualistic because it aims at everyone's happiness. An extremely individualistic society will make some people very happy and will make a lot of people very unhappy. Sadly, it won't have a good distribution of happiness in most cases. I mean, this is what we see playing out at the moment in some places in the world, where we have enormous riches, but they're just distributed in insane ways. Again, this is not a rule book, right? Aristotle and other virtuous don't want to offer a system of precepts. So this is not like utilitarianism or other versions of consequentialism. It's not like deontologism. It's not like the religious ethics in Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, where you have more specific precepts, eat this, don't eat that, or Judaism, do this, don't use God's name, and so on. And this is more about, trying to organize and give some generic guidance on what kind of traits we should cultivate in a good society. Courage, what I mentioned, temperance, generosity, right? Spending reasonably, have fun, sure, have savings, have a house, or one to rent out, one for your kids or old parents. But if you become an exploitative landlord, you're overdoing it. At some point, you need to stop and start sharing with your community and giving back. If you're enormously stingy, you never never take out your wife, you never, buy a random present just so for your kids, you never pay for the drinks of your friends. you know, if you're a boss who never considers raising salaries unless they're forced to. But again, wastefulness is not a good trait either, right? If you're splurging money on nonsense all the time, or you're a company which is, just wants to use the newest software because it looks good, it's not sensible. There are a lot of other virtues, magnificence, greatness, so on. Some of these sound sometimes funny to us today because they're so far away from the mainstream thinking, especially if you live in one of the Western individualistic capitalist countries. We care about well, the ideology, dominant ideology, is very different at the moment. It's always changing, of course, and that's always a struggle between people who try to influence the ideology and people who own the media and have different ways of influencing the media. But what Aristotle means about these things are usually quite sensible and still apply today. Right, greatness of soul would be caring about our public appearance and social perception to a healthy extent. So it doesn't mean you have to be a fashion freak, but don't voluntarily embarrass your family. Don't make others uncomfortable with your poor hygiene. Don't undermine your own opportunities, getting a job or meeting a nice partner or making friends by behaving in obnoxious ways and so on. The other extreme isn't good either, of course. Like if you only care about your appearance, you're going to be deficient in a lot of other departments. Um, Truthfulness, wittiness. You don't need to be a clown, but if you're always miserable and you can never switch from being serious, it's gonna close some doors. Friendliness, being sensitive to shame to a normal degree. Um, well, social media age, that's kind of funny. People like to look at others who they find ridiculous or dramatic. Many people find it entertaining, especially younger people, I think, whose moral compass is still just spinning totally widely. But if you get, to sort of like your late 20s, you're probably gonna get better at telling the nonsense from the less nonsense and the really uh, shameful from not shameful. It's not a nice thing to make other people feel shame, especially children. You should never do that because it undermines self-worth, self-respect in the long run. But with adults, it can be a useful tool of bringing people in line and reminding them of, like what's have a bit of dignity. There are also two varieties of justice. I'm not going to go into that because it's a whole complex topic. Justice today, most people think is at the heart of political theory and what it means to have a well-run society or democratic society. Um, Aristotle means more specific things by justice. One is more about how things are distributed in society, how people get rewarded financially and in other ways as well, owning property. And the other is more about justice as it's practiced by judges and lawyers. And they're both very important, of course, but they require their own discussion. The mean is also a good deal trickier. And Aristotle also says that, that's something that very often people in decision making positions manage to perfect or develop, but others don't because they simply are never exposed to enough situations where they could practice these virtues. But as a small scale, of course, you can practice it among your friends and your family, but that's a little bit different. Right. Um, Aristotle summarizes all this at the end of the chapter, and in practice, sometimes we won't be able, of course, to choose the mean. Just go for the lesser evil. Aristotle is a pragmatist in these things, and of course, pay attention to your own preferences. If you know that you just won't be able to withstand a certain temptation, the donut that you see, or cheating on your partner, or drinking too much, or embezzling company money, or whatever else tempts you. We're all fallible beings. Just avoid the situation. That's the exercise of virtue doesn't mean that you expose yourself constantly. Sometimes practical wisdom will tell you, look, you're not going to be strong enough to deal with this. Maybe you're tired, maybe you're already stressed, maybe you're worn out, maybe you're under a lot of pressure in other departments of your life. Avoid this situation, avoid this challenge. That's also one way of resisting bad influences. But also, if you never get angry, if you never have an opportunity to joke around, if you never have an opportunity to practice some of the virtues, except maybe the big justices, something might be wrong with the way you're running your life. To try to put yourself out there a bit more. Well, this turns kind of into an agony, anti-agony uncle session by the end, but this is part of the charm of Aristotle. He's a lot less abstract than some of the other philosophers. He's also a lot less systematic than Kant or Mill or Bentham, but maybe that's why a lot of people feel that this way of looking at things can help us to think in a more practical way, and in terms of thick concepts like the virtues and the vices, about what would constitute the mean when it comes to things like income inequality, or racism, or police brutality, or having problems with politicians not representing voters well, state capture by business, and so on. Right? I mean, you get a different perspective if you think through, what can I do? What would be the right means? What some people, notably Michael Smith from Princeton, calls the a combination of kind of humanism and virtue ethics, the advisor model, where he says, imagine that your best, actually virtuous self gives you advice. What would they say? Right, so Aristotle ends here by saying this much, then it's clear that the mean state is in every case to be praised, but that sometimes we must incline towards the excess, sometimes towards the deficiency, because in this way we should most easily hit the mean, namely what is good. On that note, I'll say goodbye to you all, and try to relate this to your own life. Do you think there are people who are really good at giving you advice, helping you to do well in life? Who can you learn from? To what extent are they able to help you achieve happiness, and what would the happy life look like to you? These are, I think, all interesting questions, and at some point it's nice if you reflect on it a bit and make a plan. Take care and have a great day. Bye-bye.